Good morning. I think we're probably all pretty familiar with the Christmas story, but I thought I'd start by having a bit of a quiz as to see how much of the Christmas story that we're familiar with actually appears in the Bible account. So this is either going to be true or false, or maybe it doesn't actually say it, but it could be true. So the first question, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Is that true or false? That's true, yeah. Mary and Joseph travelled to Jerusalem on a red-nosed reindeer.
True. False.
That's false. Do you know how they did actually travel there? Well, that actually, the donkey is a maybe, because there's no mention of the donkey in the Bible account. But they probably did, because that's how people used to travel. Next door to the inn was a sandwich shop called Pret a Manger. I've been down to get that in for a few years. Right, apart from Mary and Joseph and the people at the inn, the first people to meet Jesus were the shepherds. That's true. They were actually the sort of people that most people would cross the road rather than associate with. They were the outcasts of the day. They were smelly and dirty, and actually the first people who were invited to meet Jesus were the people who were the outcasts. The wise men arrived when all the shepherds were still there. No, it's false. Because actually, if you read the account of the wise men, it says they went to the house where Jesus was. Which means that Mary and Joseph had found somewhere to live, by the time they'd actually got there. And some people may have reckoned it may have been a year or 18 months after Jesus had actually been born before they got there. Jesus was born on the 25th of December. I think it's probably made, but we don't actually know what date he was born. So he's got a 1 in 365 chance of it being the 25th of December. When people actually decided to celebrate it on the 25th of December, they thought it was good actually to have a day to celebrate Jesus' birthday, but because he didn't know when it was, they just picked a date when there was a celebration already. And the last of these questions, there are 3 kings in the story. Actually, I think that people are saying false. Some people are saying false, some saying true. Those who are saying false are probably thinking of the gold, frankincense and myrrh people, in which they weren't kings, they were wise men. And we don't know how many there were. But actually, there were 3 kings.
I do. 3.
There were 3 gifts, but it doesn't. But we don't know whether all 3 of them bought gold, frankincense, and myrrh, or whether just one of them did. And anyway, there are 3 kings in the story, because there was Caesar Augustus, who had the decree back there being a census. There was King Herod, who was a really nasty piece of work, and there was the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus himself. So there are 3 kings in the story. But the question is, how do we know that the account in the Bible is true? If you went back a couple 150, 200 years, there are quite a lot of people writing things saying that the accounts in the Bible were written many generations and possibly even a couple of centuries later, and many thousands of miles away. And some people I've come across still seem to think that that's the case. But actually, there's quite a lot of evidence that it was written during the lifetime of the people who were there. Some of it's rather technical to do with various documents and manuscripts from the time. But I think for me, that a lot of it is to do with the details that are there in the Gospels. Who knows what the capital city of France is? Ruben? Paris, yeah. Can you name 10 villages in France? No? Now, it's possible that if it's written thousands and thousands of miles away, that people would have got Jerusalem because it's a big city and it's where the Easter part of the story takes place. But the only reason we know about Bethlehem, or Nazareth, or Capernaum, or Bethany, and Cana, and all the other places in the Gospels, is because we've read the accounts now. Back then, people wouldn't have known those places. So the people who actually wrote them down must have had a good local knowledge of where it was written. Does that make sense? Can any of you name any of the 12 disciples? Peter, yeah? Anybody else? John, yeah? Some people might have got Thomas. And some people might have got Matthew the tax collector. If somebody really, really, really wants to show off, it might come with the fact that one of the disciples was called Thaddeus. Have you ever heard of Thaddeus? You have now. Now, normally about this time of year, or possibly in January, they come up with a list of the 100 most popular names, both for boys and for girls. Now, there are some names that would appear on those lists every year. If you went back 50 years and 100 years, those names would be there. But there are other names that go up the list for a few years and then disappear. You go down the list. So you can normally tell, if somebody's got one of those names that go up the list and then go back and disappear, you can normally tell how old they would be by their name, because they would have been born at the time when that name was popular. Does that make sense? There's somebody who's a lot cleverer than me that's been able to work out all the names that would have been popular in the centuries either side of when Jesus was born, and works out that the names in the Gospels are just right for the time when it took place. So actually, not only was it the right place, but also the right time when it's said. And Luke is especially good at those details, because Luke wrote another book called The Acts of the Apostles, and in that he says, we did this and we did that. So during part of what he's writing down, he was taking part in the story of the people he was telling. And we know that he went to Jerusalem, where some of the disciples were staying, John and Peter especially. So actually he spoke to the people who had seen Jesus do miracles and seen Jesus on the first Easter rise from the dead. Now, if you were talking about things that happened 30 or 40 years ago, and you wanted to find out about it, you speak to the people who were there when it happened. And Luke had the opportunity to do that. But not only that, but if you look at the details of the Gospels, we know from John's Gospel that Jesus got John to look after his mother. And by the time that Luke would have gone to Jerusalem, Mary would have been the sort of age that a lot of your grandparents would be. So not only did Luke meet the disciples, but he also would have had the opportunity to meet Mary as well. And if you look at the Christmas story in Luke's Gospel, it's very much told from Mary's point of view. There are a couple of times when Luke says, and Mary kept these things in her heart. That means she remembered them and kept thinking about them. Now, how did he know that Mary kept these things in his heart? Because he'd met her. And there are details in the story as well that are more likely to be remembered by somebody who's expecting a baby. Such as when Mary went to visit her relative Elizabeth, who was also expecting a baby, and said that the baby inside her jumped. And to me, that's something that is more likely to be remembered by somebody who's expecting a baby herself than by a fisherman or a carpenter or any of the other people. So actually a lot of the evidence in the Gospels seems to point to them being written by people who were there when it happened, or people who met people who were there when it happened. So we've got a good idea that a lot of the things that are there are pretty reliable. But I think there's also the experience of thousands and thousands of Christians over the year who've experienced Jesus working for themselves. Now for me, I heard a lot of Bible stories when I was a child. When I was about 9 or 10, I remember sitting up in bed thinking, I know, I'll be a Christian. And the first prayer I prayed by myself, with nobody telling me to pray, was, please God, help me to become a proper Christian. I knew there was something special about Jesus, but I knew also there was a lot more that I had to understand, and I couldn't really understand it. And it wasn't really until I got to my late teens that I started to experience things, and experience a sense of joy and a sense of looking forward to going to church and a sense of looking forward to reading the Bible and things like that. And there have been things along the way, also not anything particularly massive, but there have been things along the way where I think, oh yeah, that's God doing something, or that's God saying something. And I'd really just encourage people to just ask and to pray something like the prayer that I prayed, please God help me to become a proper Christian, help me to understand what it's all about. And that's really just what I want to share with you today.